Detective James Patterson walked into the precinct that Monday morning, like he had done for the past 15 years. The other officers nodded at him with respect. Some of the younger cops even looked at him with admiration in their eyes. To them, he was everything a good detective should be. Hard-working, dedicated, a man who got results. James hung his jacket on the back of his chair and grabbed his coffee mug. The same mug he'd been using since his 3rd year on the force. It had a chip on the handle, but he never replaced it. Little things like that made him seem humble, down to earth. Just another working cop trying to make the city safer. But James Patterson had a secret that had been growing for almost 10 years now. It started small, really small, so small that James almost convinced himself it didn't count. He was working a drug bust in the south side of the city. The dealers had cash everywhere. Stacks of 20s and 50s rubber-banded together and stuffed in shoeboxes. The kind of money that regular people never see in one place. James and his partner at the time counted it all out. $43,000. They logged it, bagged it, and sent it to the evidence room. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what good cops do. But James had noticed something. When they counted the money the first time before his partner came back into the room, there had been $44,000. Maybe 44 and a half. He'd slipped $500 into his pocket. Just $500. The dealers weren't going to miss it. The department wasn't going to miss it. Nobody checks that carefully anyway. That night, James went home and stared at those 5 bills for hours. He felt sick. He felt like a criminal. He'd spent his whole career putting criminals behind bars, and now here he was, taking money from a crime scene. He almost turned himself in the next day, but he didn't, and nothing happened. No investigation. No questions. No problems at all. A year went by. Then another bust. This time James took 1,000, then 2,000, then more. He developed a system. Never take too much. Never take from the same type of case too often. Mix it up, keep the amounts reasonable. Make sure the paperwork looks clean. The money piled up in a safe in his basement. James told himself he was just keeping it for emergencies. He wasn't spending it on fancy cars or expensive vacations. He still drove his 10-year-old sedan. Still lived in the same 3-bedroom house he'd bought when he first made detective. Still packed his lunch most days. In his mind, this somehow made it less wrong. He wasn't being greedy. He was just evening things out. The city didn't pay him enough for the risks he took every day. For the times he'd been shot at. For the nights he missed dinner with his kids. For the marriage that fell apart because he was never home. The other cops at the precinct had no idea. They saw Detective Patterson as one of the good ones. He helped the new guys learn the ropes. He bought rounds at the bar when the team closed a big case. He volunteered to work the worst shifts during the holidays so officers with young kids could stay home. His arrest record was impressive. Drug dealers feared him. Defense attorneys dreaded seeing his name on witness lists. Prosecutors loved him because he was thorough. His reports were detailed. His testimony was solid. He won cases. What nobody knew was that James had become very good at making evidence disappear. Not all of it. Never the drugs. Never the weapons. Just the cash. And only some of it. Enough to matter to him, but not enough to raise red flags. He'd learned which evidence room clerks paid the closest attention, and which ones just rubber-stamped paperwork at the end of their shifts. He knew when the security cameras had blind spots. He understood exactly how the chain of custody worked and where the weak links were. James had stopped feeling guilty years ago. He'd replaced that guilt with justification. He told himself that drug dealers didn't deserve that money anyway. It was dirty money. Blood money. Money that had ruined lives and destroyed families. If it ended up in his safe instead of in some government account where it would probably get wasted on bureaucracy, what was the real difference? Besides, James figured he'd earned it. 15 years of clean collars. 15 years of making the streets safer. 15 years of putting his life on the line. The city owed him more than his salary. This was just him collecting what he was owed. On that particular Monday morning, James had no reason to think anything would be different. He had a court appearance at 10. A routine testimony about a bust from 8 months ago. Simple stuff. He'd testified hundreds of times. He looked over his notes from the case. 3 dealers arrested. 2 kilos of heroin. $17,000 in cash logged into evidence. James remembered the case well. It had actually been closer to $20,000, but who was counting? The dealers certainly weren't going to complain that the police had underreported the amount of cash they'd been caught with. Around 9:30, James's phone rang. It was Lieutenant Rodriguez from Internal Affairs. James felt his stomach tighten just a bit, but he kept his voice casual. Internal Affairs called sometimes. It was usually about some complaint from a defense attorney or a question about old paperwork. Nothing serious. Patterson needs you to come by my office this week, Rodriguez said. Just routine follow-up on some cases you worked a few years back. Sure thing, James replied, his voice steady. What cases are we talking about? Nothing urgent. We're just auditing some old evidence logs, part of a new department-wide review. You know how it is. New regulations, new paperwork. I'll email you the details. James hung up and felt the slightest prick of unease, but he pushed it down. He'd been through audits before. He'd been interviewed by Internal Affairs before. His system was solid. His paperwork was clean. His reputation was bulletproof. He finished his coffee, grabbed his case files, and headed out to court. Just another day in the life of Detective James Patterson, respected officer, trusted colleague, decorated detective, man whose badge had always protected him from consequences, a man who had no idea that his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down around him. Detective Rachel Kim arrived at the Chicago Police Department on a cold Tuesday morning in late September. She was the new Internal Affairs investigator, transferred from the Financial Crimes Division. Most cops hated Internal Affairs. They called them rats, snitches, the people who made good officers' lives miserable over paperwork mistakes and minor policy violations. But Rachel didn't care what people thought of her. She had a job to do, and she was good at it. Before joining the police force, she'd spent 5 years as a forensic accountant for the FBI. She knew how to follow money. More importantly, she knew how criminals tried to hide it. Her new captain gave her a stack of files on her first day. Random cases from the past 5 years. Nothing specific. Just a general audit of evidence handling procedures. The department did these reviews every few years to make sure everything was running smoothly. Rachel started the way she always did, slowly, carefully. Most people rush through financial records looking for big red flags. Rachel had learned that the real secrets hide in the small details. The numbers that are just slightly off. The patterns that repeat in ways they shouldn't. She spent her first 2 weeks just reading. Case reports, evidence logs, property room receipts, arrest records, court documents. She didn't talk to anyone, didn't ask questions, just absorbed information like a sponge. On her 3rd week, something caught her eye. A drug bust from 3 years ago. 2 suspects arrested. Evidence logged showed $8,400 in cash. But when Rachel cross-referenced the arrest report with the court records, the defense attorney had mentioned in a motion that his clients claimed they had over $10,000. Now, criminals lie all the time. They inflate numbers to make themselves seem more important. Rachel knew that. But something made her dig deeper into this particular case. The lead detective on that bust was James Patterson. Rachel made a note of the name and kept reading. 2 days later, she found another discrepancy. Different case, different suspects, but the same pattern. Cash amount in the evidence log didn't quite match what was mentioned in other documents. And again, Detective James Patterson's name was on the case. Rachel pulled up every case Patterson had worked in the past 10 years. There were a lot of them. The man was productive. His arrest record was impressive. Prosecutors loved working with him because his cases were solid. His paperwork was thorough, but Rachel wasn't looking at the quality of his arrests. She was looking at the money. She created a spreadsheet. Every drug bust Patterson had worked. Every dollar amount logged into evidence. Then she started comparing those numbers to anything else she could find. Defense attorney motions, preliminary hearing transcripts, police reports from other officers who'd been on scene. The pattern was there. Faint, but there. Cash amounts that seemed just slightly lower than they should be. Not every case. That would be too obvious. But enough cases that Rachel's instincts told her something was wrong. The problem was proof. Criminals claiming they had more money than what was logged wasn't evidence. It was just their word against the officer's word. And in that situation, everyone believes the cop. Rachel needed more. She needed something concrete. She started digging into the evidence room procedures. How did money get from a crime scene to the property room? Who counted it? Who verified the count? Who had access to it after it was logged? She interviewed evidence room clerks. Casual conversations. Nothing that would alert anyone that she was investigating anything specific. She asked about their procedures, their busy days, their difficult days, the times when things didn't go smoothly. One clerk, an older woman named Dorothy who'd worked there for 20 years, mentioned something interesting. She said some detectives were really particular about how evidence was logged. They'd stand right there and watch every step. Make sure everything was done exactly right. Detective Patterson is like that, Dorothy said. Very thorough. Always wants to personally verify everything is logged correctly. Rachel smiled and nodded, but her mind was racing. A detective who was always personally present during evidence logging. A detective who made sure he was involved in every step of the process. That could be seen as dedication. Or it could be seen as something else entirely. She went back to her office and pulled the security camera footage from the evidence room. The department kept recordings for 3 years. After that, they were deleted to save storage space. Rachel started watching. Hours and hours of boring footage. People walking in and out, bags being logged, paperwork being signed. Then she saw it. A moment so quick she almost missed it. Detective Patterson entering the evidence room with a sealed bag. He placed it on the counter. The clerk turned away to grab a form. Patterson's hand moved. Just for a second. The bag shifted slightly. When the clerk came back, Patterson smiled and chatted while the evidence was logged. Rachel rewound the footage and watched it 10 more times. Was she seeing what she thought she was seeing? Or was her suspicion making her see things that weren't there? She needed more footage. She requested archives from different dates, different cases. The department had to pull them from backup storage, which took a week. During that week, Rachel didn't sleep much. She kept running the numbers in her head, kept looking at the patterns. When the footage finally arrived, Rachel locked herself in a viewing room for 3 days. She watched every single time Patterson had logged evidence over the past 3 years. And there it was. Not every time, but enough times. Moments when his hands moved in ways they shouldn't. Moments when bags seemed lighter after he touched them than before. Moments when clerks were distracted and Patterson was alone with evidence for just a few seconds. It was subtle. So subtle that anyone watching casually would never notice. But Rachel had been trained to see these things. To notice the tiny movements that meant someone was hiding something. She also noticed which clerks were on duty during these moments. Always the ones who were busy. Always the ones who were handling multiple pieces of evidence at once. Never the ones who were meticulous and careful. Patterson had been picking his moments, picking his opportunities. He'd been smart about it, careful, patient, but now Rachel had him. Or at least she had enough to dig deeper. She started pulling bank records, phone records, financial histories. She requested interviews with every evidence clerk who'd ever worked with Patterson. She compiled a timeline of every case, every dollar, every moment that didn't add up. 6 weeks after she'd started looking into Detective James Patterson, Rachel had enough evidence to bring to her captain. Not enough to arrest him yet, but enough to begin a formal investigation. She walked into the captain's office on a Friday afternoon with 3 folders full of documentation, spreadsheets, camera footage, witness statements, financial analysis. We have a problem, Rachel said, placing the folders on the desk. And it's bigger than I initially thought. The captain looked at the folders, then at Rachel. How big are we talking? Over $200,000, Rachel replied. Possibly more. Spanning at least a decade, maybe longer. The captain's face went pale. Who? Detective James Patterson. For a long moment, the captain just stared at her. Patterson was one of their best. Everyone knew him. Everyone respected him. The idea that he could be corrupt seemed impossible, but Rachel's evidence didn't lie, and they both knew it. What do you need? The captain finally asked. I need to interview him, Rachel said, and I need him to not know this is anything more than a routine follow-up. The captain nodded slowly. Set it up. Rachel walked out of that office knowing that everything was about to change. For Patterson. For the department. For all the cases he'd ever worked. The truth was coming, and there was no badge in the world that could stop it. James Patterson received the email on a Monday afternoon. Internal Affairs wanted to meet with him Thursday morning at 9. Routine follow-up on some cases from a few years back. Standard procedure. Nothing to worry about. He'd gotten emails like this before, maybe 5 or 6 times over his career. They'd ask him to clarify something in an old report, or explain why a certain procedure was followed. He'd answer their questions, sign some paperwork, and that would be it. But this time, something felt different. James couldn't put his finger on it. Maybe it was the timing. Maybe it was just his imagination. He told himself he was being paranoid. His system had worked for 10 years. There was no reason to panic now. Still, he didn't sleep well that night. Or the next night. Or the night after that. Thursday morning arrived too quickly. James put on his best suit, dark blue, the one he wore when he testified in important trials. He wanted to look professional, confident, like a man who had nothing to hide. He walked into the Internal Affairs office at 8:55. 5 minutes early. That was important. Show respect. Show cooperation. Show that you're taking this seriously, but not too seriously. Rachel Kim was waiting for him in a small interview room. She stood up when he entered and shook his hand. Her grip was firm but not aggressive. She smiled, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Detective Patterson, thanks for coming in. I'm Rachel Kim from Internal Affairs." "Have a seat." James sat down. The chair was uncomfortable. Probably by design. Everything in Internal Affairs offices was designed to make you uneasy. The harsh fluorescent lights, the plain walls, the single table between you and the investigator. Rachel placed a thin folder on the table. Just one folder. That was either a good sign or a very bad sign. James couldn't tell which. "So," Rachel began, "I'm reviewing some old cases as part of a department-wide audit. Nothing specific to you. We're just making sure all our evidence handling procedures are up to standard. You've worked a lot of drug cases over the years." "Yes, ma'am," James replied. His voice was steady, calm. "Drugs are a major problem in this city. Been my focus since I made detective. You're good at it too. Impressive arrest record. Prosecutors speak highly of you." James nodded, accepting the compliment but not seeming too proud. "I just do my job." Rachel opened the folder. "Let me ask you about a specific case. December 2019. You arrested 2 suspects in a drug operation on the South Side. Do you remember that one?" James's mind raced. December 2019, 4 years ago. He'd worked dozens of cases that year. Which one was she talking about? "I'd need to see the case file to refresh my memory," he said. "I work a lot of cases." "Of course." Rachel slid a paper across the table. It was an arrest report, James's arrest report. He scanned it quickly. The names came back to him. Small-time dealers, easy bust. He'd taken maybe 3,000 from that one. "Okay, yeah, I remember now," James said. "What about it?" Rachel pulled out another paper. "The evidence log shows you recovered $8,400 in cash from the scene. Is that correct?" "If that's what the log says, then yes." "You personally counted the money?" "Yes, that's standard procedure." "And you're confident that amount is accurate?" $8,400. James felt the first real flutter of concern in his chest. Why was she focusing on the money? "Yes, that's what we counted." Rachel nodded slowly. She pulled out another document. "The thing is, during the preliminary hearing, the defense attorney submitted a motion claiming his client said they had over $10,000. Now, I know criminals lie all the time, but I'm curious about your response to that claim." James forced himself to stay relaxed. "Like you said, criminals lie. They always claim we took more than we did. It's a common defense tactic, try to make us look corrupt." "That makes sense," Rachel said, but she didn't sound convinced. She pulled out more papers. "Let me ask you about another case. March 2020, different suspects. Similar situation. You logged 7,200 in evidence. Defense claimed it should have been closer to 9,000. James felt sweat starting to form on his lower back. 2 cases. She was asking about 2 cases. That wasn't routine. "Same answer," James said. "Criminals lie about money all the time. I logged what was there." Rachel kept going. June 2021. You logged 12,300. Defense claimed 13,000. April 2022. You logged 5,000 even. Defense claimed it was closer to 7. She slid case after case across the table. James's mouth went dry. She had pulled every single case where there'd been a discrepancy. Every single one. "Detective Patterson," Rachel said, her voice still calm but with an edge now. "I'm seeing a pattern here. In 23 different cases you worked over the past 4 years. There are claims that the cash seized was higher than what you logged. Now in 1 or 2 cases that's expected. Criminals lie. But 23 cases, that starts to look like something else.
James's heart was pounding.
But he kept his face neutral. I logged what I found. If you're suggesting I did something wrong, you're way off base. I've been a cop for 15 years. My record speaks for itself. Your record is exactly what I'm looking at, Rachel replied. She pulled out a laptop and turned it toward him. I've been reviewing security footage from the evidence room. This is from November 2022. Do you remember logging evidence that day? She pressed play. James watched himself on screen, walking into the evidence room, placing a bag on the counter, the clerk turning away, and then his hand moving. It was only 2 seconds of footage, but those 2 seconds changed everything. James felt his world tilting. That doesn't show anything, he said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Rachel played another clip, then another. Different dates, different cases, but the same movements, the same pattern. Detective Patterson, Rachel said quietly, I have security footage from 17 different instances where your behavior with evidence bags appears suspicious. I have financial records showing unexplained deposits into your bank account. I have testimony from evidence clerks who say you were always very particular about being present during logging procedures. I have statistical analysis showing that cash amounts in your cases are consistently lower than initial reports suggest. She paused and looked directly into his eyes. I have enough evidence to present to the district attorney, right now, today. But I'm giving you a chance to explain yourself first. This is your opportunity to tell your side of the story. James sat there frozen. His mind was racing through options. Deny everything, lawyer up, claim the footage was misinterpreted, claim the clerks were mistaken, claim this was all a witch hunt against a good cop. But looking at Rachel's face, looking at the stack of evidence in front of him, James knew the truth. She had him. She really had him. For 10 years, he'd believed his badge made him untouchable. He'd believed he was too smart to get caught. He'd believed his reputation would protect him. He'd been wrong. I want a lawyer, James finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Rachel nodded. That's your right. But I want you to know something, Detective Patterson. This investigation is happening whether you cooperate or not. We have enough evidence to move forward. The only question now is whether you want to make this easier on yourself or harder. James stood up. His legs felt weak. I said I want a lawyer. Fine, you're suspended effective immediately. Turn in your badge and weapon to Lieutenant Rodriguez on your way out. Those words hit James like a punch to the gut. Turn in your badge. After 15 years, after everything he'd done for this department, after all the criminals he'd put away, his badge. The thing that had protected him all these years. The thing that had made him feel powerful and untouchable. It meant nothing now. James walked out of that interview room knowing his life as he knew it was over. The question wasn't whether he'd be caught anymore. The question was how much damage would be done before this was all finished. He'd spent 10 years building a secret life of crime. Rachel Kim had spent 8 weeks tearing it all down, and she wasn't done yet. James Patterson walked out of the police station that Thursday afternoon without his badge, without his gun, without the identity he'd worn for 15 years. The afternoon sun felt too bright. The street noise felt too loud. Everything felt wrong. He sat in his car in the parking lot for 20 minutes just staring at nothing. His phone buzzed constantly. Text messages from other detectives. They'd heard. Word traveled fast in a police department. Suspension meant something serious. Everyone would be talking. His lawyer called that evening. Her name was Monica Chen, and she'd represented cops before. She had a reputation for being tough and honest. Sometimes too honest. James, I got the call from Internal Affairs, Monica said. We need to meet tomorrow morning, early, and you need to tell me everything. I mean everything. I can't help you if I don't know what I'm dealing with. That night, James couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the interview in his mind. Rachel's calm voice. The security footage. The look on her face when she told him to turn in his badge. He'd seen that look before. On his own face. When he arrested criminals who knew they were caught. The next morning, James sat in Monica's office and told her everything. The first time he took money. how it grew, how much he'd taken over the years. The system he'd built. All of it. Monica listened without interrupting. She took notes. Her expression never changed. When he finished, she put down her pen and looked at him. $200,000, she said. Roughly. Over 10 years. Maybe more, James admitted. I didn't keep exact records. Of course you didn't. Monica leaned back in her chair. Okay, here's where we are. They have security footage. They have financial evidence. They have discrepancies in evidence logs across dozens of cases. This is bad, James. This is really bad. Can we fight it? Monica shook her head.
Fight it with what?
You just admitted everything to me, and even if you hadn't, they have enough evidence to bury you. The question isn't whether you'll face consequences. The question is how severe those consequences will be. James felt his stomach drop. So what do? We negotiate. We cooperate. We try to get you the best deal possible. If you fight this and lose at trial, you're looking at 15 to 20 years. If we cooperate now, maybe we can get it down to 7 or 8. 7 or 8 years. In prison. James had spent his career putting people in prison. He knew what happened to cops inside. They were targets. Everyone wanted a piece of them. There's more, Monica continued. Every case you ever worked is now under review. Every arrest. Every conviction. Defense attorneys are already filing appeals. Some of those people you put away are going to walk free because of this. That hit James harder than anything else. Criminals he'd arrested. Dangerous people. Drug dealers. Violent offenders. They might go free because of what he'd done. Within a week, the news broke. A local reporter got wind of the story. Decorated detective under investigation for evidence theft. The headline was everywhere. Television, radio, social media. James's photo plastered across every news outlet in the city. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters. Former colleagues. People he hadn't talked to in years. He stopped answering. Stopped checking his messages. Stopped looking at the news. But he couldn't avoid what was happening at the department. Rachel's investigation had expanded. She was interviewing everyone he'd ever worked with. Every evidence clerk. Every partner. Every prosecutor who'd relied on his cases. Detective Mike Torres had been James's partner for 3 years. They'd worked dozens of cases together. Mike came to James's house one evening unannounced. I testified today, Mike said when James opened the door. He looked tired, angry. They asked me if I ever saw you do anything suspicious with evidence. If I ever noticed money being off. If I ever had doubts about your counts. James didn't know what to say. I told them the truth, Mike continued. I said I never saw anything. But you know what's killing me? I keep going back through my memories. All those cases we worked, all those times you insisted on logging the evidence yourself. I thought you were just being thorough. I thought you were setting a good example. Mike, I trusted you, Mike interrupted. We all did. And now every case I worked with you is under review. My reputation is being questioned because I was your partner. Do you understand what you've done? Mike left without saying goodbye. James stood in his doorway and watched his former partner drive away. Another relationship destroyed. Another consequence he hadn't fully considered. The district attorney's office scheduled a meeting. They wanted to discuss a plea deal. Monica advised James to take whatever they offered. They have you cold, she said. This is damage control now. At the meeting, the prosecutor laid out the terms. James would plead guilty to theft, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. In exchange for his cooperation and a full confession, they'd recommend 8 years instead of 20. You need to understand something, the prosecutor said. This isn't just about you. 73 cases you worked are being reviewed. 73. Some of those convictions will be overturned. Some very bad people might walk free. The city is facing lawsuits. The department's reputation is damaged. This is bigger than you. James signed the plea agreement. What choice did he have? The fallout continued. A drug dealer James had arrested 4 years ago was released because his conviction depended heavily on evidence James had handled. 2 weeks after his release, that dealer was arrested again for a different crime. The victim's family blamed James. They were right to blame him. Other cops started coming forward. Officers who'd had suspicions but never reported them. One evidence clerk admitted she'd felt pressured by James to rush through paperwork. She'd been too intimidated to say anything at the time. Now she couldn't stop crying during her interview with Internal Affairs. James's ex-wife called. They'd been divorced for 5 years, but they shared 2 kids. The kids are seeing this on the news, she said. Their friends are seeing it. Do you have any idea how this affects them? He didn't. He'd been so focused on not getting caught that he'd never really thought about what would happen if he did, not just to him but to everyone around him. The police department held a press conference. The chief stood at a podium and talked about integrity and accountability. He announced that Detective James Patterson would be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. He talked about the steps the department was taking to prevent this from happening again. New oversight procedures, new audit systems, new training. James watched the press conference on television. The chief looked disappointed, betrayed. James had shaken that man's hand at award ceremonies, had received commendations from him. Now his name was being used as an example of everything a cop shouldn't be. Rachel Kim's investigation was wrapping up. She documented everything. Every stolen dollar. Every manipulated evidence bag. Every lie James had told. Her report was 300 pages long, detailed, thorough, undeniable. James sat in his house, surrounded by the life he'd built with stolen money, a life that was crumbling around him. He thought about all the times he'd justified what he was doing, all the ways he'd convinced himself it was okay, that he deserved it, that it didn't really hurt anyone. He'd been wrong about all of it. His trial date was set. Even with the plea deal, he'd have to stand in court and admit what he'd done. Face the judge. Face the victims of his crimes. Face the truth about who he'd become. James Patterson had spent 15 years believing his badge made him special, made him untouchable, made him above the rules that applied to everyone else. Now he was about to learn what happened when a badge couldn't protect you anymore, when the truth caught up, when justice came for one of its own. The worst part wasn't the prison time ahead of him. It wasn't the lost career or the destroyed reputation. It was knowing that he'd done this to himself. Every choice, every stolen dollar, every lie. He'd built his own cage, one decision at a time, and now he had to live in it. The courtroom was packed on the morning of James Patterson's sentencing. Reporters filled the back rows. Former colleagues sat scattered throughout the gallery, their faces hard and unreadable. Victims of crimes James had investigated came to watch justice finally apply to him. James sat at the defense table in a gray suit. Not his police uniform, not his detective badge, just a man waiting to hear how many years of his life he'd spend behind bars. The judge entered and everyone stood. Her name was Judge Helen Martinez. She'd been a prosecutor 20 years ago, back when James was just starting out. They'd worked together on cases. She'd respected him then, trusted him. That made this moment even harder. "Please be seated," Judge Martinez said. Her voice was firm but carried no warmth. The prosecutor stood first. He laid out the facts of the case one more time. $217,000 stolen over 10 years. 73 cases compromised. Evidence tampered with. Trust violated. He talked about the drug dealers who'd been released because their convictions couldn't stand. About the lawsuits the city now faced. About the damage done to the entire justice system. "Your Honor," the prosecutor continued, "Detective Patterson wore a badge that represented honor, integrity, and justice. He took an oath to protect and serve. Instead, he used his position to commit crimes. He used his badge as a shield to hide behind while he stole from the very cases he was supposed to be solving." Then it was Monica's turn. James's lawyer stood and tried to paint a different picture. She talked about his years of service, the real criminals he'd caught, the genuine good he'd done before he went wrong. She mentioned his 2 kids, his elderly mother, the fact that he'd cooperated fully once caught. "My client made terrible choices," Monica said. "He knows that. He's admitted that. He's pleaded guilty. He's shown remorse. We asked the court for mercy. But everyone in that courtroom knew mercy had limits, especially for someone who'd betrayed the badge." Judge Martinez asked if James wanted to speak. He did. His lawyer had prepared a statement with him. But when James stood up, he looked around that courtroom and saw faces he recognized. Other cops, victims, people whose lives he'd affected. His prepared statement suddenly felt hollow, empty. Words on paper that didn't really say what needed to be said. "I don't have a good excuse," James began, his voice shaky. "I could tell you I was stressed, that I felt underpaid, That I convinced myself it didn't matter because I was taking from criminals anyway. But those are just excuses. They don't make what I did okay. He paused, took a breath. I was a cop for 15 years. I knew right from wrong better than most people. I just chose wrong, over and over again. I chose to steal. I chose to lie. I chose to betray everyone who trusted me. Some of the officers in the gallery shifted in their seats. A few looked away. I've destroyed my career, my reputation, my relationships. But worse than that, I've damaged the cases I worked. I've hurt the families of victims who deserve justice. I've made it harder for good cops to do their jobs because now people will doubt them. All because I was greedy and thought I wouldn't get caught. James looked directly at Judge Martinez. I deserve whatever punishment this court gives me. I just want everyone to know that I'm sorry, truly sorry. Not because I got caught, but because of the harm I caused. He sat down. Monica squeezed his arm once, a small gesture of support. But they both knew it wouldn't change anything. Judge Martinez took a long moment before speaking. She looked through the case files in front of her. Then she looked at James. Mr. Patterson, she began, and the use of Mr. instead of detective felt like another layer being stripped away. I've been on this bench for 12 years. I've sentenced hundreds of people. But this case is particularly difficult because you weren't just any criminal. You were entrusted with power. You were given authority. You wore a badge that meant something. She paused, letting her words sink in. That badge represented the public's trust. Every time a police officer makes an arrest, every time evidence is collected, every time someone is prosecuted, the system relies on trust. Trust that officers are following the law. Trust that evidence is handled properly. Trust that justice is being served fairly. The courtroom was completely silent. You violated that trust in the worst possible way, Judge Martinez continued. You didn't violate it once in a moment of weakness. You violated it systematically, deliberately over 10 years. You had countless opportunities to stop, to come clean, to do the right thing. You never did. You only stopped because you were caught. James felt tears forming in his eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. He deserved this. Every word. 73 cases have been reviewed because of your actions. 11 convictions have been overturned. 11 criminals have been released, some of them dangerous people. Families who thought they had justice now have to live with the knowledge that the person who harmed them might be free because a detective they trusted was corrupt. Judge Martinez looked down at her papers, then back at James. The prosecution has recommended 8 years as part of your plea agreement. I've considered that recommendation carefully. I've also considered your cooperation, your guilty plea, and your statement today. Everyone leaned forward slightly, waiting. But I've also considered the severity of your crimes and the damage you've caused. This court needs to send a clear message that no one is above the law. Not prosecutors, not judges, and certainly not police officers. She paused. James Patterson, I hereby sentence you to 10 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You will also be required to pay full restitution of $217,000. You are permanently barred from any law enforcement position. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. 10 years, 2 more than the plea deal recommended. James felt his legs go weak. Monica was already whispering to him about appeals, about behavior reductions, about how he might serve 8 years with good behavior. But James barely heard her. He looked back at the gallery one more time. He saw Rachel Kim sitting in the 3rd row. She wasn't smiling. She didn't look triumphant or satisfied. She just looked tired, like someone who'd done a difficult job that needed to be done. Their eyes met for a brief moment. James nodded once, a small acknowledgement. She'd caught him. She'd done her job. She'd proven that badges don't protect criminals, even when those criminals wear the badge themselves. 2 federal marshals approached. It was time to go. James stood up and held out his wrists. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked into place. The same handcuffs he'd put on hundreds of criminals over the years. Now they were on him. As they led him out of the courtroom, James thought about all the times he'd arrested someone and felt righteous. Felt like he was making the world safer. Felt like one of the good guys. He'd been so certain of his own importance. So convinced that rules didn't apply to him the same way they applied to everyone else. He'd been wrong. The badge hadn't made him special. It had just given him more responsibility, more trust to uphold. More accountability when he failed, and he had failed. Completely. James Patterson walked out of that courtroom no longer a detective, no longer a cop, no longer someone who could hide behind a badge and a title. He was just a criminal being led to prison. Just another person who'd thought he was too smart to get caught and learned the hardest way possible that truth always catches up. In the end, the badge meant nothing. The years of service meant nothing. The awards and commendations meant nothing. Only the truth mattered. Only justice mattered. And both had finally found him. Rachel Kim watched him go, then closed her case file. Her job was done. The truth had won. The badge had failed to protect him. Justice, slow but certain, had come for one of its own.